Don't let the wolves hear me." Grace Bennett almost missed the words beneath the rain. The storm had been striking the roof of the lantern house for nearly an hour, hard enough to make the old wooden beams shudder above the empty tables. She had already turned the sign, banked the fire, and carried the final tray of cups toward the kitchen when something outside made her stop. Not a knock. A cry. Small. Broken. Quickly swallowed. Grace set the tray down and opened the door. Cold rain struck her face. The road beyond the inn had disappeared beneath mud and silver water, bordered on one side by the black line of Ashwood Forest. Lightning exposed an overturned merchant cart near the ditch, one shattered while still turning slowly in the wind. The sound came from beneath it. Grace gathered her wool cloak and crossed the road. Her boots sank almost to the ankle. Wet hair escaped her braid and clung to her cheek. She knelt beside the cart and lifted the torn canvas hanging from its side. A boy stared back at her. He could not have been older than 8. He was curled against the broken axle with both knees drawn to his chest, one hand pressed tightly beneath his ribs. His coat was too large for him. Rainwater ran from the dark hood, carrying thin threads of blood across his fingers. His other hand held half of a black metal badge, a crowned wolf, broken directly through the center. Grace did not ask his name. Children who were ready to answer questions did not hide beneath ruined carts and storms. They did not sit with their backs against solid wood or watch the road instead of the person offering help. "You're hurt," she said. "It isn't bad." The lie was quiet and practiced. Grace noticed his eyes then. Gray-blue, too steady for his small face. They moved past her shoulder toward the forest. "Who are you hiding from?" His fingers tightened around the broken badge. "Don't let the wolves hear me." Grace heard them a moment later. Not howling. Hooves. Several horses were moving through the trees, fast but controlled. Torchlight flickered between the trunks, growing brighter with every breath. The boy tried to push himself farther beneath the axle. Pain crossed his face before he could hide it. Grace held out her hand. "You don't have to trust me." The riders were close enough now that she could hear leather harnesses and the low voices of men speaking through the rain. "But you cannot stay here." The boy looked at her hand, then at the inn, then back toward the approaching lights. For one terrible second, Grace thought fear would keep him frozen. His cold fingers closed around hers. She pulled him free. He was lighter than she expected, but his legs nearly failed when he stood. Grace caught him against her side and drew her cloak around both of them. They crossed the road as the first rider emerged from the forest. Grace pushed open the inn door, guided the boy inside, and moved him toward the narrow space behind the woodpile. "Stay quiet," she whispered. The boy caught her sleeve before she could turn away. "They were my father's crest." Grace looked down at the broken crowned wolf in his hand. Outside, 3 armored riders stopped beneath the lantern house sign. One of them knocked. Not like a traveler seeking shelter, like a man who expected every locked door to open for him. The knock came again. 3 measured strikes. Grace stood between the door and the woodpile, listening to the boy breathe behind her. He was trying to do it quietly, but pain made each breath uneven. The rider outside struck the door a 3rd time. "Open in the king's name." Grace pulled the bolt free. Cold air entered first, followed by rain and the smell of wet leather. 3 men waited beneath the lantern house sign. Each wore dark armor marked with the crowned wolf of Blackwood, the same crest the boy had broken in half. The man in front was tall and narrow-faced, with rain running from the edge of his hood. His hand rested near his sword, not upon it, but close enough to make the intention clear. "We are searching for a lost child," he said. Grace held the door only wide enough to show the empty tables behind her. "What child?" "A boy, 8 years old. Dark hair, gray eyes." The man on his left shifted in the saddle. The asset was seen near this road. The leader turned his head sharply, only for a moment, but Grace heard it. Asset, not son, not heir, not frightened child. Asset. She looked past them toward their horses. The animals were breathing hard, yet their lower legs carried almost no mud. The northern road had been flooded since dusk. No rider could have crossed it without black water reaching the fetlocks. These horses had come from the southern trail. One bore a faint brand beneath its saddle strap, a split oak, the mark of Lord Warren's territory. Yet the riders wore Blackwood steel. "Have you seen him?" the leader asked. Grace let her gaze move slowly across the room as though considering. No, the lies settled between them. Behind the woodpile, Something scraped softly against the floor. The leader's eyes shifted toward the sound. Grace reached for a cup on the nearest table and let it fall. Clay struck stone and shattered. "My apologies," she said. "I was cleaning when you arrived." The rider dismounted. His boots touched the threshold. Grace did not move aside. "You understand," he said, "that hiding the king's property would be treason." Property. The word told her more than the armor did. "If I had seen a lost boy in this storm," Grace said, "I would have asked whether he was hurt before asking where he was." The man's expression changed. "Not much. Enough." He leaned closer, and Grace saw that the wolf emblem on his chest had been fastened upside down. A true Blackwood guard would have noticed before mounting. The rider behind him drew his cloak tighter. From beneath it came a faint metallic smell. Silver. Grace kept one hand on the door. "The road east is washed out," she said. "If he came this way, the river may have forced him toward Millstone Chapel." The leader studied her face. Grace let him. Fear was easiest to hide when one stopped trying to look brave. At last, he stepped back. "If you find him, ring the chapel bell twice." "I will." The riders turned their horses toward the eastern road. Grace watched until their torchlight disappeared behind the rain. Then she closed the door and set the bolt. For several seconds, the only sound inside the inn was the fire settling in the hearth. The boy emerged from behind the woodpile. His face was pale. "You lied for me." Grace looked at the broken wolf badge in his hand. "Yes." "Why?" She crossed the room, knelt, and held out a dry towel. "Because they asked where you were before they asked whether you were alive." The boy did not touch the soup until Grace moved away from the table. She understood why. Trust was not something frightened children accepted because an adult spoke gently. Trust required distance. A clear view of the door. Hands that remained visible. Time enough to decide whether kindness carried a hidden price. Grace placed the bowl near the hearth, added a thick slice of brown bread, and sat on the opposite side of the room. "You can eat first," she said. "Questions can wait." The boy watched her for several seconds. Then hunger defeated caution. He crossed the room slowly, keeping one shoulder turned toward the door, and climbed onto the bench. Steam rose against his pale face as he lifted the spoon. He ate too quickly, not carelessly, desperately. The way someone ate when he had learned that food could be taken away without warning. Grace pretended not to notice him slip half the bread into his coat pocket. She busied herself near the counter, wringing rainwater from her braid and hanging her cloak beside the fire. Behind her, the spoon scraped the bowl in steady, controlled movements. "What should I call you?" she asked. The scraping stopped. "You don't have to give me your real name." He looked toward the rain striking the window. "Rain," Grace said, "until you choose something better." The smallest change passed across his expression. Not a smile. The memory of one. "Rain," he repeated. His voice was softer now. When the bowl was empty, Grace carried over the medicine box. Rain immediately shifted backward, his right hand disappearing beneath his coat. "I won't touch you without permission," she said. His eyes narrowed. "You're bleeding through your sleeve." "It will close." "Not heal. Close." Grace sat on the floor so she would not stand over him. "You can show me the wound, or you can hold the bandage yourself. Either is fine." Rain studied her face, searching for impatience or deception. At last, he pulled back his sleeve. The cut ran along his forearm, shallow but angry, its edges darkened by something that shimmered faintly in the firelight. Silver. Grace had seen injuries from silver blades before. Hunters sometimes carried them near the border, though possessing one without royal permission was punishable by death. She cleaned the wound carefully. Rain did not cry out, but his fingers closed around the edge of the bench until his knuckles whitened. Beneath the blood, the skin was already drawing together faster than it should. Grace said nothing. Neither did he. When she finished wrapping his arm, Rain looked at the bandage as though kindness itself were suspicious. "You knew those men were lying," he said. "I knew they were not worried about you." "That isn't the same." "No," Grace agreed. "It was enough." His gaze dropped. "You could ask for a reward." "I could. You could take me to the castle." "I could do that too." "Why don't you?" Grace closed the medicine box. "Because you are afraid of people wearing your father's crest." Rain went completely still. She regretted the words immediately, not because they were wrong, but because she had spoken the truth before he was ready to hear it. "I found this," he said at last. He reached into the lining of his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of parchment, damp at the edges and stitched into the fabric with black thread. A broken seal marked one corner. A crowned wolf above two crossed blades. Grace did not recognize the handwriting, but she recognized the name beneath it. Aaron Cross, Royal Beta to the Alpha King. Before she could ask what the letter contained, Rain swayed. Grace caught him as sleep and exhaustion finally overcame whatever discipline had kept him upright. His fingers closed around her sleeve. "Father," he whispered. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain, a wolf answered from the forest. Rain's grip tightened, and even unconscious, he tried not to make a sound. The forest went silent before the Alpha King arrived. Grace noticed it while carrying Rain toward the small room behind the kitchen. The storm had weakened to a steady whisper against the windows, but Ashwood Forest had not returned to itself. No owls called between the trees. No branches cracked beneath the weight of deer. Even the wolves that had answered one another all night had stopped. The silence felt deliberate, as though every living thing outside had lowered its head. Martha Reed appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a wool robe over her nightdress, a candle raised in one hand. She looked first at the sleeping boy in Grace's arms, then at the bloodied bandage, then at the broken crown wolf badge resting on the table. "What have you brought into my inn?" "A child." "That is not what I asked." Grace laid Rain on the narrow cot and pulled a blanket over him. His fingers remained caught in her sleeve, even in sleep. "3 men came looking for him," she said. "They wore Blackwood armor." Martha's face tightened. "Then why is he still here?" "Because they called him an asset." The candle flame shifted between them. Grace showed her the damp parchment. Martha did not touch it. She only read the name beneath the broken seal. "Aaron Cross. You should burn that. If it belongs to the Royal Beta, especially if it belongs to the Royal Beta." Martha crossed to the window and pulled the curtain aside by one finger. The northern roads have been closed since midnight. Nathaniel Blackwood's son disappeared after a royal convoy was attacked near Stonebridge. Grace looked toward the cot. Rain's dark hair had fallen across his forehead. Without fear holding his face so tightly, he looked younger. "People say the Alpha King has emptied 3 garrisons to find him," Martha continued. "They say he hanged 6 traitors before breakfast during the border rebellion. They say he can hear dishonesty in a man's heartbeat. People say many things. They lower their voices when they say his name." A vibration passed through the floorboards. Not thunder. Hooves. Dozens of them. Rain woke instantly. He did not rise slowly like a child pulled from exhausted sleep. His body snapped upright, one hand reaching beneath his coat for the knife he no longer carried. Grace sat beside him. "You're safe." No, the word came too quickly. Outside, horses entered the yard. Harnesses creaked. Men dismounted. Steel struck stone. Rain stared toward the front room, his breathing shallow. "Is it your father?" His eyes filled with something Grace had not seen before. Hope. Pain. And beneath both, terror. "He will be with them." "Who?" Rain looked at the folded letter in Grace's hand. Before he could answer, the front door shook beneath a single heavy knock. Martha's candle trembled. Grace rose. Rain caught her wrist. "My father won't hurt you," he whispered. "But don't let the man beside him touch me." A voice came through the door. Low. Controlled. Powerful enough to make the walls feel smaller. "Open." Martha went pale. Grace crossed the inn and lifted the wooden bar. When the door swung inward, cold air and torchlight flooded the room. The man standing on the threshold was taller than any Grace had ever seen, broad beneath a black wolf fur cloak, rain shining across dark hair, and a face carved into hard, masculine lines. Armed guards filled the yard behind him. At his right stood a scarred captain. At his left stood Aaron Cross. Rain made one small sound behind Grace. Not relief. Fear. The Alpha King entered the inn without waiting to be invited. Nathaniel Blackwood seemed too large for the room. His black cloak carried the smell of rain, pine, and cold iron. Water darkened the broad line of his shoulders, and every guard behind him remained perfectly still, as though even movement required his permission. His eyes passed over Grace first, then the untouched cups, the wet child's cloak beside the fire, the bloodied cloth near the medicine box, and finally the small figure standing behind her. Something changed in his face. Not enough for anyone else to call it emotion. Enough for Grace to see the father beneath the king. Oliver. The name left him rougher than any command. Rain. Oliver did not move. Nathaniel took one step forward. Grace shifted between them. Steel whispered from several scabbards at once. The scarred captain lifted one hand, stopping the guards before they could draw fully. Aaron Cross did not wait. "Your Majesty, stand back. The woman may be holding him under threat." Grace turned her head toward him. Aaron wore no fear on his face, only concern, carefully arranged. His dark green cloak was fastened with the same crown wolf seal stamped onto the letter hidden in Oliver's coat. Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed on his son. "Come to me." Oliver's fingers closed around the back of Grace's dress. He wanted to move. She felt it in the small pull of his body, in the way hope fought against terror inside him. But his eyes were not on Nathaniel. They were on Aaron. Grace stepped half a pace aside, enough for father and son to see each other clearly, but not enough to leave Oliver exposed. Nathaniel noticed. So did Aaron. "This is unnecessary," Aaron said. "He has been missing all night. He may be confused." Oliver flinched at the sound of his voice. Nathaniel's attention sharpened. Grace lowered herself until she was level with the child. "You decide," she said quietly. Aaron's expression hardened. "The heir does not decide whether he returns to his king." Grace looked at him. "He decides who touches him." The room tightened around the words. Nathaniel finally turned his eyes toward Grace. They were gray-blue, exactly like Oliver's, but colder, older, trained by years of command and betrayal. "You knew who he was?" "No, yet you hid him from my guards." They did not behave like men searching for a child. Aaron gave a short, humorless laugh. "And you consider yourself qualified to judge royal soldiers?" Grace felt fear move through her, slow and heavy. She did not let it reach her voice. They asked where he was before they asked whether he was alive. The scarred captain looked toward Aaron. Nathaniel did not. He crouched instead. The motion surprised everyone. A king lowering himself in front of a child was not weakness, but it revealed something more dangerous than power. Love without defense. "Oliver," he said. "Look at me." The boy did. Nathaniel held out one hand. No command. No demand. Only an open palm. For one breath, Oliver remained behind Grace. Then he stepped around her. Nathaniel caught him before he had taken 2 full steps. The Alpha King pulled his son against his chest with both arms. Oliver buried his face in the wet fur of his father's cloak, and the control he had held all night broke apart in a single sound. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The entire inn looked away, except Grace. She watched his hand spread protectively across the back of Oliver's head. Then Aaron moved closer. Oliver felt it before Grace saw it. His whole body went rigid. He twisted in Nathaniel's arms, reached desperately toward Grace, and whispered against his father's shoulder, "Don't let him take me again." Nathaniel became completely still. His gaze lifted over his son's head. This time, he looked directly at Aaron Cross. Aaron Cross did not deny the accusation. He looked at Oliver as though the boy had spoken from fever rather than memory, then turned to Nathaniel with carefully measured concern. "Your Majesty, he is frightened and injured. We do not know what this woman told him while he was alone with her." Grace felt the accusation enter the room before Aaron spoke it plainly. "She may have taken him herself." Martha drew a sharp breath. The scarred captain's hand settled on his sword. Nathaniel remained still, one arm locked around his son. Aaron continued. "She hid the royal heir from soldiers wearing your crest. She carries a private letter bearing my seal. And now the boy repeats words that place blame upon the one man responsible for your security." "I found the letter inside his coat," Grace said. "Convenient." Oliver lifted his face from Nathaniel's shoulder. "He put me in the carriage." Aaron's expression did not change. "You were unconscious when we found you. You said my father was dead." Silence moved through the inn. Nathaniel looked at Aaron. Not with anger. With attention. That was worse. A crash sounded outside. One of the horses screamed. The captain spun toward the door, just as orange light rose beyond the rain-streaked windows. "Fire!" someone shouted. Flames climbed the stable roof with unnatural speed, racing along oil-soaked timber. Guards rushed into the yard. Martha ran toward the kitchen well, calling for buckets. Grace smelled silver beneath the smoke, the same metallic scent that had clung to the false riders. "They came back," she said. An arrow shattered the front window. Nathaniel turned, shielding Oliver with his body as glass scattered across the floor. The captain drew his sword and drove 2 guards toward the entrance. In the confusion, Aaron moved. His hand closed around Oliver's arm. "I will take the prince to safety." Oliver screamed. Grace did not think. She seized the heavy wooden serving tray from the nearest table and struck Aaron across the wrist. His grip broke. The tray cracked against bone. Aaron stared at her in disbelief. Grace pulled Oliver behind her. For one breath, no one moved. Then Aaron reached beneath his cloak. Nathaniel caught his forearm before the hidden blade cleared its sheath. The Alpha King's expression became terrifyingly calm. "Captain Samuel." The scarred man turned. "Disarm him." Aaron twisted free before Samuel reached them and kicked a chair into his path. Smoke rolled through the broken window. Outside, armed figures moved between the burning stable and the forest. Grace grabbed Oliver's hand. "This way." She dragged him behind the counter, lifted the trapdoor beneath the flour sacks, and guided him toward the storage cellar. Oliver resisted. Your father knows where you are." Nathaniel stood between them and the flames, sword drawn now, black cloak thrown aside. He looked less like a king than the creature frightened men imagined when they whispered his name. His eyes found Grace's. "Keep him safe." She nodded once. Aaron reached the rear door. Before escaping into the smoke, he looked back at Grace. The polished concern had vanished from his face. What remained was hatred. Grace lowered Oliver into the cellar and followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. In darkness, the boy clung to her sleeve. Above, steel struck steel. And for the first time, Nathaniel Blackwood had seen the truth without anyone needing to explain it. Grace had been accused of taking his son. Yet when danger came, she was still the first person willing to stand between Oliver and the man who wanted him back. The cellar door opened only after the fighting stopped. Grace heard the bolt lift above them, followed by Nathaniel's voice. Grace. Not maid. Not woman. Her name. She pushed the trapdoor upward. Smoke had turned the inn's ceiling black. Rain entered through the shattered window, hissing where it struck the burning boards. Captain Samuel stood near the door with blood along one sleeve. Two attackers lay bound beside the hearth. Aaron Cross was gone. Nathaniel reached into the cellar and lifted Oliver out first. The boy clung to his father's neck, exhausted but no longer silent. Grace climbed after him. 3 men escaped toward the southern road, Samuel said. Aaron was with them. "He is going to Stonebridge," Grace replied. Every guard looked at her. Nathaniel's attention settled on her face. "How do you know?" Grace remembered the false riders outside the inn. Their polished armor. Their mudless horses. The careless word one of them had used when he thought she was only a waitress standing behind a half-open door. The man who came here earlier said the asset had to reach Stonebridge before the second bell. Samuel's jaw tightened. That route was classified. Nathaniel shifted Oliver higher against his chest. "Who knew it?" "Your Majesty," Samuel said carefully. "You, me, Aaron, and the 3 lords assigned to the Southern Treaty." Grace removed the damp letter from inside her dress. She had hidden it there before opening the door to the riders. The broken seal was still visible. "Aaron's name is on this." Nathaniel unfolded the parchment. Most of the ink had blurred in the rain, but one line remained clear. "The heir must be delivered before the bridge is closed." "It proves nothing," Samuel said. "Anyone could have stolen his seal." Oliver lifted his head. "He used a song." Nathaniel looked down at him. "What song?" "The one Mother used to sing." Something passed across the king's face. "Grief, quickly controlled." Oliver continued. "Aaron whistled it before the men attacked the carriage." They answered by tapping twice on the door. Grace felt the memory return. Aaron had whistled when he entered the inn. Softly, for notes beneath the noise of the rain. She had thought it was habit. "He did it here," she said, "when he first saw Oliver." Nathaniel's eyes hardened. Samuel moved toward the prisoners and pulled one man upright by the collar. "What happens at Stonebridge?" The attacker smiled through a split lip. "Ask your king who benefits when the South murders his son." The answer was clear. If Oliver died at Stonebridge, Nathaniel would blame Lord Warren. The treaty would collapse. Armies would cross the border before anyone examined Aaron's evidence. Nathaniel handed Oliver to Grace. The gesture surprised her more than any command could have. His son settled into her arms without hesitation. "You trust me with him?" she asked. "I trust what he does when you hold him." Nathaniel turned toward Samuel. "Prepare the horses." Grace looked toward the rain-dark road. "There is a faster way." Samuel frowned. "The southern road is flooded." "I know." She pointed beyond the kitchen, toward the abandoned mill path hidden behind the forest ridge. "I delivered food there for 3 winters. The old mill tunnel opens below Stonebridge. Nathaniel fastened his sword belt. You will show us. It was not a question. Grace looked at Oliver, then at the flames consuming the stable Aaron had tried to use as a grave for the truth. Yes, she said. Outside, the second bell began to ring. The old mill tunnel smelled of wet stone, rust, and river water. Grace led them through darkness with one hand against the wall and the other wrapped around Oliver's cold fingers. Nathaniel followed close behind, his presence filling the narrow passage even when she could not see him. Captain Samuel and 4 guards moved last, their boots splashing through water that reached their ankles. Above them, the storm pressed against the earth. The tunnel ends beneath the eastern side of Stonebridge, Grace whispered. There is a service stair behind the abandoned grain house. How far? Samuel asked. Less than a mile. Oliver stumbled. Nathaniel caught him before Grace could turn. For one moment, the feared Alpha King carried his son against his chest while ducking beneath the low beams of a forgotten mill tunnel. No throne, no guards standing at attention. Only a father moving through darkness because someone he trusted had shown him a road. They reached the stair as the second bell finished ringing. Grace pushed open the rotten wooden hatch. Rain struck her face. Stonebridge stretched across the river below, narrow and ancient, its black arches disappearing into mist. Torches moved along the western end. Aaron's men were already there. A royal carriage stood near the center of the bridge. Empty. Waiting. Nathaniel lowered Oliver behind the grain house. Stay with Samuel. Oliver shook his head and caught Grace's sleeve. She crouched beside him. I will come back. You said that before. And I did. His grip loosened. Nathaniel looked toward the bridge. Aaron wants me in the center. He wants the bridge to fall, Grace said. She had seen the rope. A thick anchor line ran beneath the eastern railing, almost invisible in the rain. Most of it had already been cut. Only a few pale fibers remained. The carriage was not bait for an ambush. It was weight. If Nathaniel stepped onto the weakened center while the carriage rolled forward, the eastern section would collapse into the river. Grace ran. Stop her, Aaron shouted. An arrow struck the stone beside her. Nathaniel and Samuel charged from cover as steel rang across the bridge. Grace reached the anchor line and saw a man holding a short axe above the final strands. She threw herself against him. They struck the railing together. The axe fell. The man seized her coat, but Grace drove her knee into his leg and tore free. The carriage began to roll. Its wheels turned slowly at first, then faster on the rain-slick stone. Oliver, Aaron called from the western end. Grace looked back. Oliver had left cover. He stood near the bridge entrance, frozen by Aaron's voice. The weakened rope snapped. Stone groaned beneath the carriage. Grace ran toward the boy. Nathaniel shouted her name. The eastern arch dropped several inches. Cracks spread across the bridge like black lightning. Grace reached Oliver, caught him around the waist, and pulled him behind the grain house as the carriage broke through the center stones and vanished into the river below. The impact sent water high enough to strike the bridge walls. Across the remaining span, Nathaniel drove Aaron to his knees. Aaron's sword slid away. Samuel bound his wrists. Rain streamed down Nathaniel's face as he looked toward Grace and Oliver. She still held the damp letter beneath her coat. The paper had survived the fire, the tunnel, and the storm. Aaron had lost the bridge. He had lost the prince. And now the one piece of evidence he had tried to destroy was still protected by the woman he had mistaken for powerless. The council chamber had never been built for people like Grace Bennett. Its ceiling rose higher than the lantern house roof. Blackwood banners hung between pillars of dark stone, and every chair surrounding the long oak table belonged to someone whose family name had been recorded for generations. Grace stood at the center in a borrowed blue-gray dress. Oliver held her hand. Across the chamber, Aaron Cross knelt in chains. Rainwater had dried on his dark green cloak, leaving pale marks along the hem. Without his royal insignia and polished authority, he looked smaller, not harmless, only exposed. Nathaniel sat at the head of the council. He had not placed Oliver beside the throne. He had placed him beside Grace. Captain Samuel stepped forward and laid the evidence upon the table. The broken wolf badge, Aaron's sealed letter, the false soldier's armor, and a section of the rope cut from Stonebridge. One of the southern lords examined the letter. The seal is genuine. Aaron lifted his head. A seal can be stolen. So can a uniform, Grace said. Several council members looked at her. Aaron smiled faintly. And now an servant speaks before the crown. Nathaniel's gaze moved to him. She speaks because you failed to silence her. The smile disappeared. Samuel called the first witness. One of the captured riders admitted that Aaron had ordered them to take Oliver through Stonebridge and leave evidence bearing Lord Warren's mark. A second confessed that the royal convoy route had been changed the night before the attack. Then Daniel Cole was carried into the chamber. The young guard who had helped Oliver escape was pale from blood loss, but alive. He pointed at Aaron. He opened the carriage door. Aaron's chains tightened as he moved. Daniel continued. He told the prince that the Alpha King had been killed. When I tried to stop them, he ordered his men to cut me down. Oliver's fingers closed harder around Grace's hand. Nathaniel saw it. His face became very still. The final judgment did not take long. Aaron Cross was stripped of rank, property, and name before the court. His surviving allies were arrested before sunset. The Southern Treaty was restored, and the evidence against Lord Warren was burned in the courtyard where all 6 territories could witness it. But Nathaniel did not dismiss the council. He descended from the raised platform and stopped before Grace. She lowered her eyes by habit. Look at me, he said. Grace did. The feared Alpha King stood close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath his control, the sleepless nights spent searching for his son, and the gratitude he did not seem accustomed to expressing. What reward do you ask? Whispers moved through the chamber. Grace thought of gold, land, a room in the castle. Every answer the nobles expected from a woman who owned almost nothing. Instead, she remembered the boy beneath the overturned cart. 3 false soldiers at the door. A child who had believed no safe place existed. I want lanterns, she said. Nathaniel waited. Shelters along every border road. At inns, mills, chapels, and guard posts. Places where lost children and injured travelers can enter without paying, proving rank, or giving a name before they are warm. The council fell silent. Grace continued. The people guarding those doors must be allowed to refuse soldiers who cannot prove who they are. One lord frowned. You would give innkeepers authority over royal officers? I would give frightened children one door that does not open from the outside. Oliver leaned against her side. Nathaniel looked at his son, then back at Grace. It will be done. He turned toward the council. From this day forward, the Royal Lantern Network will operate under Grace Bennett's authority. Any person wearing my crest who interferes with its protection will answer directly to me. He removed a small silver clasp from Samuel's open case. A lantern surrounded by the Blackwood wolf. Nathaniel fastened it to Grace's cloak himself. She opened her door for a child whose name meant nothing to her, he said. That is why his life meant everything in her hands. No one in the chamber looked away. Months later, the first royal shelter opened beside the rebuilt lantern house. On the first stormy night, 3 quiet knocks sounded against the door. Grace rose from the hearth. Oliver ran beside her, carrying a dry blanket. Nathaniel stood behind them, not as a king giving orders, but as a father who had learned what one open door could save. Grace lifted the bar. A frightened little girl waited in the rain. She looked at the royal guards and stepped backward. Grace knelt. You do not have to tell us your name, she said, holding out her hand. You can come inside first. The girl looked at the warm fire beyond the doorway. Then she took Grace's hand. Above them, the lantern burned through the rain. And this time, the wolves standing outside were there to make sure no one followed her in. The first time Nathaniel asked Grace to dine at Blackwood Keep, she thought he was testing the lantern network. She arrived carrying 3 inspection reports, a list of damaged road markers, and a complaint from an innkeeper whose shelter had been searched without permission by Northern guards. The dining hall had been prepared for 2 people. Grace stopped beneath the stone arch. Nathaniel stood beside the long table, wearing no crown and no armor. Only a black wool tunic, dark trousers, and the expression of a man who had faced armies more comfortably than a quiet room. You brought work, he said. You asked me to come to the keep. I asked you to dinner. Grace looked at the papers in her hands. You did not specify. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not the first time she had seen him smile, but it remained rare enough to change the entire shape of his face. Oliver appeared from behind the high-backed chair. I told him you would bring reports. You were supposed to help me, Nathaniel said. I am helping. The boy climbed into his seat with the confidence of someone who had already decided how the evening should unfold. Grace placed the reports on a side table. Dinner was simple by royal standards. Roasted chicken, dark bread, root vegetables, and apple cakes Oliver had insisted the kitchen prepare. No council members waited to evaluate her manners. No nobles watched to see whether an servant knew which spoon to use. Still, Grace found herself sitting too straight. Old habits did not disappear simply because a king offered a chair. Nathaniel noticed. You are waiting for someone to tell you that you do not belong here. Grace looked down at her plate. Yes. No one will. That has never stopped people before. Oliver reached for another apple cake. Then father can frighten them. Nathaniel gave his son a look. Grace laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised all three of them. For several minutes, the hall felt less like the center of 6 territories and more like the lantern house after closing, when the fire burned low and no one needed to perform importance. Later, Oliver fell asleep beside the hearth with a book open across his chest. Grace moved to cover him with a blanket. Nathaniel reached the boy at the same time. Their hands touched over the wool. Neither pulled away immediately. He trusts you, Nathaniel said. He needed someone who believed his fear. I should have seen it sooner. You were taught to look for threats outside your walls. And you? Grace glanced toward the dark windows. I was taught that danger often wears the uniform meant to make you feel safe. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his hand beneath hers, palm upward. Not taking. Offering. Grace let her fingers rest against his. I do not know how to thank you without making it sound like a debt, he said. Then do not thank me. What should I do? Keep the shelters open. Listen when Oliver is afraid. Ask questions before drawing a sword. His thumb moved gently across her knuckles. And if I want something beyond gratitude? Grace felt the room become quieter. Not empty. Waiting. She looked at the feared Alpha King, at the man who had entered her in like a storm and later stood behind her while she opened its door to another frightened child. Then ask me as Nathaniel, she said. Not as my king. His voice softened. Will you stay? Grace looked at Oliver sleeping near the fire. Then back at his father. Yes, she said. But not because you ordered me to. Nathaniel lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her fingers. I would never make that mistake. The first person to call Grace Luna was not a noble. It was a little girl from the Western Road shelter, no older than 6, with tangled red hair and a wooden wolf clutched against her chest. Grace had arrived at sunrise to inspect the new dormitory roof. Rain had leaked through 2 beams during the night, and the children had been moved into the chapel hall until repairs could be made. Nathaniel came with her. He had begun doing that more often, not because the roads were dangerous, not because the council required it. He came because Grace traveled, and somewhere between the Lantern House and Blackwood Keep, her work had become part of the life he wanted to understand. The girl stared at him first. Most children did. Nathaniel Blackwood filled doorways even when he tried not to. He wore a dark cloak over broad shoulders, his face stern from years of command, his eyes pale and watchful. Then the girl looked at Grace. Are you the Luna? The shelter keeper nearly dropped her ledger. Grace crouched. No, the answer came too quickly. Nathaniel said nothing. The girl frowned. But you stand beside him. That does not make me Luna. You tell the guards what to do. Grace glanced toward the 2 royal soldiers repairing the broken shutters. They were doing it incorrectly. The girl considered this. And the prince likes you. From the chapel steps, Oliver lifted one hand in agreement. Nathaniel looked away, but Grace saw the beginning of a smile. The girl hugged her wooden wolf tighter. My mother said a Luna protects people who cannot protect themselves. The words settled differently. Grace looked across the shelter. Children slept beneath borrowed blankets. An injured traveler warmed his hands near the stove. A kitchen maid from the southern estates was giving a statement to a guard who listened without interrupting. 6 months earlier, none of those things would have existed. Grace touched the little girl's shoulder. Then perhaps your mother understood the title better than I do. That evening, Nathaniel found her beneath the shelter lantern. Rain moved softly beyond the porch roof. Oliver had fallen asleep inside beside the other children, refusing the private room prepared for him. You said no, Nathaniel said. Grace folded the inspection report. To what? To being Luna. You never asked me. His gaze held hers. I did not know whether the title would feel like a gift or another cage. Grace leaned against the wooden post. And now I know I would not ask you to stand beside me unless you could continue standing against me when I am wrong. A quiet laugh escaped her. That may happen often. I have accepted the risk. He reached into his cloak and removed no crown, no jeweled necklace, no ceremonial symbol. Only a small silver lantern. On one side was the Blackwood wolf. On the other, an open door. I am not asking you because Oliver loves you, Nathaniel said, or because the council expects it, or because the kingdom enjoys turning gratitude into romance. Grace's breath caught. I am asking because you taught me that protection without listening is only another form of control. Because you see people I was trained to overlook. Because when fear enters a room, you do not ask who deserves safety first. He held out the lantern. Grace Bennett, will you stand beside me as Luna of Blackwood? She looked through the open doorway. Oliver slept beneath the shelter's warm light. The little red-haired girl had left her wooden wolf near his hand. Grace thought of the night she had found a boy beneath an overturned cart. She thought of 3 false soldiers, a broken badge, a door she had opened despite the danger waiting outside. Then she looked at Nathaniel. I will, she said, if the shelters remain under my authority. They will, and no guard enters one without permission. Agreed. And Oliver is allowed to be afraid without being called weak. Nathaniel's expression softened. Always. Grace took the silver lantern. Nathaniel did not kiss her like a king claiming a queen. He touched his forehead to hers and waited. Grace closed the final distance. Inside the shelter, a child laughed in her sleep. Outside, the rain continued falling. But beneath the lantern, no one was lost anymore. The wedding bells stopped after the first note. Grace heard the silence before she understood it. She stood beneath the stone arch of Blackwood Chapel wearing a gown of winter-white wool, its sleeves embroidered with small silver lanterns instead of royal crowns. Nathaniel waited at the far end beside Oliver, dressed in ceremonial black, broad-shouldered, and still beneath the banners of 6 united territories. Every face had turned toward the western doors. A boy stood there. He could not have been older than 10. Rainwater ran from his torn coat onto the chapel floor. One boot was missing. Blood darkened the cloth around his ankle, and both hands were wrapped around a sealed leather pouch. 2 royal guards held him by the arms. We found him climbing the outer wall, one guard said. He claims he must speak to the Luna. Grace stepped away from the altar. A council lord rose sharply. The ceremony has begun. So has his fear, Grace replied. She crossed the chapel while whispers moved through the gathered nobles. The boy watched the guards rather than her, his body rigid between their hands. Release him. The guards obeyed. Grace knelt so they were level. You do not have to tell me your name. The boy's breathing changed. Only slightly. Enough. You can speak when you are ready. He looked past her toward Nathaniel. They are going to burn the eastern shelter. The chapel became still. Grace did not ask who. She asked when. At sunset. The boy held out the leather pouch. Inside were 3 letters bearing the seals of lords whose lands had lost authority when the Royal Lantern Network expanded. The messages ordered hired soldiers to destroy the shelter and leave southern weapons among the ruins. Not merely an attack. A political accusation. The same kind of lie Aaron Cross had once tried to build at Stonebridge. Nathaniel descended from the altar. Captain Samuel. The scarred captain stepped forward. Take 20 guards. Secure the eastern road. No banners. No horns. We do not warn them we are coming. Samuel bowed and left immediately. The council lord who had objected stared at the wet child. This could be a trick. Grace rose. Then we investigate it. And delay a royal wedding based on the word of a trespasser? Oliver stepped beside her. He came here injured because he believed she would listen. The boy looked at the prince with startled recognition. Nathaniel's gaze moved across the chamber. My son is correct. He removed the ceremonial clasp from his cloak and placed it on the altar. This wedding does not begin while children carrying warnings are treated as interruptions. No one argued again. The ceremony was postponed. Grace sat with the boy near the chapel fire while Martha brought soup and a healer examined his ankle. His name was Jacob. He had worked in the kitchens of one of the conspiring lords and stolen the letters after hearing men discuss the attack. He had walked for 2 days. Why did you come here? Grace asked. Jacob looked at the silver lantern fastened near her heart. My sister stayed at one of your shelters last winter. They believed her before they knew who she was. Grace took his cold hand. Then she helped save lives today. At dusk, Samuel returned. The eastern shelter still stood. The hired soldiers had been captured before they reached the forest road. The 3 lords named in the letters were arrested before midnight. The wedding resumed the next morning. No additional guards lined the chapel. Instead, shelter keepers, stable workers, cooks, travelers, and children filled the front rows beside nobles who had once believed such places belonged only to them. Jacob sat beside Oliver wearing dry boots. Grace walked toward Nathaniel alone. No one gave her away. She belonged to no man who could transfer her protection from one household to another. She approached the altar because she had chosen the life waiting there. Nathaniel took her hands. "I cannot promise you a kingdom without danger," he said. Grace looked at the man who had once entered her in like a storm, and who now stopped ceremonies when frightened children spoke. "No," she replied, "but we can build one where danger is heard before it reaches the door." He smiled. "Then build it with me." They exchanged vows beneath a lantern that remained lit despite the morning wind moving through the chapel. When they stepped outside, rain had begun to fall. Oliver stood between them, holding both their hands. Across the courtyard, every shelter bell in Blackwood territory began to ring, not as an alarm, as a promise. Wherever a lost child found a lantern burning above a door, someone inside would listen before asking for a name. The first lantern Grace lit as Luna stood above the same door she had opened for Oliver in the rain. The lantern house had changed since that night. Its broken roof had been repaired, the stable rebuilt in stone, and a second wing added for children and travelers who needed more than one evening of shelter. Yet Grace had refused to replace the old wooden door. The scratches remained near the lower hinge. The rain had darkened its grain. One shallow mark still showed where the false soldiers had struck it while demanding entrance in the king's name. "Some doors should remember what they kept out," she had told Nathaniel. He stood beside her now beneath a gray autumn sky, taller than everyone gathered in the courtyard, though he no longer needed silence to announce his authority. Oliver, nearly 10, held the long taper used to carry flame from the hearth. Around them waited shelter keepers, cooks, stable workers, healers, guards, and children from every territory under Blackwood rule. No nobles stood above them. No servants remained against the walls. Grace took the taper from Oliver and raised it toward the iron lantern. The flame caught slowly, trembling once before growing steady behind the glass. Bells began ringing along the border roads. One at Millstone Chapel, another near Stonebridge. Then dozens more, distant and uneven, answering across forests, villages, mountain paths, and frozen crossings. Each bell marked a door where no frightened person would be required to prove importance before receiving warmth. Nathaniel looked toward the sound. "How many now?" 43, Grace said. 44 after the river shelter opens next month. Oliver frowned. 45. You forgot the one near the western quarry. Grace smiled. You are right. He had begun studying the shelter maps with more attention than his military lessons. Nathaniel pretended to disapprove, though Grace had seen him quietly move council meetings so Oliver could attend inspections. A young guard approached from the road, leading a woman and 2 children beneath a shared cloak. The woman's face was bruised. The older child held a baby against her chest. All 3 stopped when they saw the Alpha King. Fear moved through them immediately. Nathaniel recognized it. Once, he might have crossed the distance and demanded an explanation. Now he stepped back. Grace went forward alone. You are safe here, she said. The woman looked at the royal crest above the guard's armor. The men who hurt us wore that wolf. Grace heard several soldiers shift behind her. Nathaniel did not defend his emblem. He did not tell the woman she was mistaken. Then those men will answer for what they did, he said. But first, you will eat. The woman's eyes filled. Grace opened the old door. Warmth reached the courtyard, carrying the smell of bread, cedar smoke, and thick vegetable soup. The children entered first. The woman followed after them. No one asked her name. That evening, Grace found Oliver sitting beneath the lantern, listening to rain begin against the roof. Do you remember? He asked. The night you found me. Every time it rains. He looked toward Nathaniel, who was helping a stable boy repair a loose shutter instead of ordering someone else to do it. Would you still have opened the door if you knew who I was? Grace sat beside him. Yes. Would you have opened it if I were no one? She took his hand. Especially then. Above them, the lantern burned steadily through the storm. Far beyond the inn, other lights answered in the darkness. Nathaniel crossed the courtyard and stood beside them, one hand resting on Oliver's shoulder, and the other finding Grace's. The kingdom would never become a place without cruelty, betrayal, or fear. Grace understood that now. Safety was not a promise made once from a throne. It was a choice repeated at every door. Listen, look closer. Believe the frightened voice before power teaches it to disappear. 3 knocks sounded from the road. Grace rose. Nathaniel lifted the bar while Oliver reached for a dry blanket. Together, they opened the door.